Protests for land and illegal occupation of land have become commonplace across South Africa. But now there is also a grave shortage of burial land, and some municipalities have run out of space. They are appealing to people to consider cremation and the reopening of family graves. Aisha Ismail has more.
The city of Cape Town is busy creating new cemeteries as well as expanding others, but this is not without challenges.
As a very real example, Khayelitsha, we have a number of cemeteries there, but one of our cemeteries have been invaded by people who now live in our cemetery spaces.
The Dean of St. George's Cathedral says other options are available besides cremation.
The old practice of mausoleums are being revisited. I know in Maitland Cemetery, the Stutterwoods family, for example, has a mausoleum. It's in terrible disuse. It's been occupied by the living.
For some, cremation is not an option. But Sheikh Riyad Fatah from the Muslim Judicial Council says there are enough cemeteries available that were closed during apartheid when the areas were declared whites only.
The Muslim Judicial Council many years ago has issued a fatwa which allows for the reuse of graves by family members, and that saves a lot of space.
Africans believe in the living dead. To cremate will be a taboo because there's a belief that an older person, when they pass on, they eventually become ancestors.
While there seem to be no immediate solutions, religious leaders have suggested a public debate. Aisha Ismail, Cape Town.
Well, to discuss this issue, I'm joined by the Islamic Burial Council's Mohammed Tariq, who joins us from our Durban studio. And here in the studio, in Johannesburg, I have historian Professor Pitika Nduli. Good evening to both of you, gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us. If I may start with you, Mr. Tariq. This issue raises or throws up quite a number of issues, isn't it?
This issue brings up a lot of issues, and in fact it's a burning point if you look at the land space at such. But if you really look at it now with the Muslim community, because obviously when someone dies, it's actually that the end of the life in the world, but we believe in the process of the life after death. So cremation is something that's not going to be something that the Muslim community is going to allow and accept on this situation itself. So it becomes a very difficult process, especially when we're looking for the land and seeing that the space has now become a challenge within the community now. And obviously the cremation is against the beliefs of the Muslim community in the contradictory to what we will call the Sharia and the last rites of a burial of a person.
Okay, Prof, it does throw up quite a number of issues that are not simple, to deal with, isn't it?
No, it certainly, does. But what is quite surprising is that as a people, let's say speak of African people, we were wearing our skins, we were walking nice and comfortable. Today we wear suits, we drive absolutely cars because culture changes. Therefore the issue of cremation, many people will tell you that it is not an African thing. But I'll tell you for sure that when a king or a prince goes and fights in another land and dies, when they come back, they are not going to bury anybody that is smelling. What did they used to do then? They would put up a funeral pyre and burn the person and get the ashes and then bury the ashes. That's a very practical need for it. Now, the question of sharing graves. Then again, when you speak to other African people, they are saying there are different types of people who die. Some of them, we hide them. Others, we throw them away. Others, we put them as examples because they were very good. Now, if the person that died there is a rapist, no one wants to go and share the grave. But different families are saying, I know that Pitika and the father got along very well. So let's actually do it. So it throws up all of these issues. But the most important thing that underlines all of these things started in 1913 with the Land Act. That's where the issue again of the land becomes far much more very, 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 very important. We cannot hide it. It's not just an economic issue. It's a cultural issue. It's a religious issue. It's a variety of things. So this issue throws in a whole pot, a cauldron of ideas, feelings, and emotions.
Mohammed Tariq, at the end of the day, whatever our firm beliefs, we have to be practical about it. We are indeed running out of space. Where do you think we can find one another? There can be compromises.
I think where there can be compromises within the Muslim community, as I said, that cremation would be out of the discussion and the question as to anyone even considering it, because that would not be something that we appropriate to the Muslim law for us in the burial. But what we should look at is basically sit down and look at the recycling process or the reusage of the graves, like approximately after, most probably within the duration of 5 years and above, or some of them have said mostly 7 years and above, that we can recycle or reuse these graves. So this will be actually giving us some sort of option actually for the space to do that. Beside this, I don't see any other way within the jurisdiction and the jurisprudence of the Muslim community for us to actually try and make this process easier, because remember, we have a crisis, but it's such also that your last rites has to be, and there's only one way unanimously all the Muslims would agree that we have to bury. There's no other way that we would actually have. We don't have a choice within the rites of our burial, and that is to bury in the ground, and that's the way we have been practicing from the ancient Islam that is coming about to this current time that is here, is to bury someone. So the idea that we must look into is actually reinvent the process of recycling, using the grave again after approximately 5 to 7 years, even if it's family graves or other graves that can be used in this process, that will be able to combat a lot of problems for us, especially with this challenge of the land that we are faced with. Prof, your thoughts on reusing?
Yeah, I think reusing is a very, very practical thing. But at the same time, we are talking about the people in towns. It talks to us about the rupture between the rural as well. The very people who are complaining about no graves in here, they've got their own homes where the funerals are in the yard, in the cattle prod, and everywhere else. So those are some of the things that really need to be done. But I think ultimately, until we get the land back, the question of reburials is the only option that seems to be working side by side with the issue of cremation. Because families can just decide as to whether who would share the grave with who. And once the family has actually agreed, then not even anybody, even God, would accept it.
Mohammed Tariq, how should we take this conversation forward? Because also, I mean, right now, it seems to be happening like at officials within a municipality, or someone will have a conference, and then this issue is debated there, but that becomes the end of it. How should we move forward now to dealing with this issue?
I think the way forward firstly will be the challenges that we are faced with. We'll have to run an education process for the communities to actually understand that what are the challenges we are faced with. Because if you bring it out now, people say there's a lot of land and there's houses being built, etc. Now how come suddenly for burial and graves we don't have? So I think it's merely that in each region we should build up an education process, and in this education process we should actually then try to now address the challenges that we have. And the idea of having maybe a conference in terms of the burial situation and discuss this. I think ideally education is something that we have, because when we deal with this issue without education, then obviously we're not going to overcome these challenges, and it's not going to be easier. Yes, we have a challenge. The ways we have a religious barrier, we'll have to put both these issues together and see how we can overcome this problem, and how unanimously everyone can get their religious rights and their burials to be done. Because remember, it's the last rights of an individual. Every everyone wants it to be in a dignified process. We don't want to come into a situation that where we have a body to bury and then we can't find the space. Then obviously we have to address these issues within the graveyard itself, look at issues at how, from an Islamic perspective, we can meet this issue of burying someone, how we could look into this matter, as we spoke about the reusage of the grave, to look at how practically, I'm sure many of us haven't really went and put this into practice, but I think the time has come now for us to put it into practice and look at all the issues regarding this year. And this would ideally be the issue to address the communities first, make them understand this. Yes, we are faced with this challenge, and how do we overcome this challenge? I think that is the way forward for us, is an education process throughout the province and throughout the countries, to go about and educate them and tell them this is what we are faced with, so that it will become a learning process. Anything that where we're not going to educate the community as such as to what is being happening with this year, or would I say maybe alerting the community as to what is our challenges, then that will become easy for us.
Last word from you, Prof.
Yes, I think it's right sometimes to talk about conferences, but as you have rightly said, after the conference and then what? So I think the issue is that traditional leaders, traditional healers, education institutions have got to come up with this, and government itself has got to make provisions to give land to those people while we are settling the broader issues of the land, because the land is absolutely there. It's still absolutely kind of shameful that we don't have a land. We can't even bury our own people in our own entire country. So in the end, government has got to act. It has got to make land available, but conversations and discussions have to take place. Traditional leaders have to be involved in it. Traditional healers have to be involved with it. Even educational institutions have to be involved in it, because it's becoming part and parcel of all of these things that are happening in the country, that we go ahead, we speak, and we just leave those things like that. If the conference that he speaks about is going to say, what are the issues? What are the methods that we can use in order to do these things? What resources are going to be needed by it? Because some people are going to say to you, cremation is very expensive. That's the only reason they don't want. If then government can build cremation, kind of centers, so that the money is not, it becomes a question, then we can then begin to have a proper discussion.
Special thanks to both my guest historian, Professor Pitika Ntuli, and Islamic Burial Council's Mohammed Tariq. Still to